Much of what we talk about on this show is about designing your systems, designing your life systems, designing your software systems, your working systems, your management or people systems. Most of what we do in our lives is governed by the systems we have propagated. Let me say this another way. Most of our behaviors on a day-to-day basis, they are coming from, they're shaped by, they are kind of elucidated by the systems that reinforce those behaviors. When I say system right now, the system that reinforces any given behavior doesn't necessarily have to be designed. Systems emerge. They exist whether you create them or not. A well-designed system is one that considers a lot of different variables, but if you don't have systems set in place, they will emerge. Some easy kind of heuristics when you think about systems, one of the systems that you have is your habitual system. Things that you do because you have some learned behavior that makes them easy to do. The system here is kind of a self-reinforcing flywheel of behavior. You have habits because you engage in that behavior. And you engage in that behavior because you have habits. And so, in that way, habits are self-strengthening. You're going to continue deepening a habit by continuing to participate in that habit. Not all systems are like this, but this particular kind of part of a system is called a feedback loop. And so if you have things that have those self-reinforcing feedback loops, that system is going to get stronger the longer you use it. In today's episode, I want to talk about a specific type of governance for your system design. We're going to talk a little bit more about system design in future episodes, maybe not necessarily as a series, but certainly an interesting topic to dive into because of the outsized effect that these systems can have on your life and on your work. It's worth exploring whether your system design is actually getting you what you want. But one principle, one kind of lens that you could look at for governing your system design, in other words, these are kind of a rule set or a way of determining if your system design is appropriate. One lens that you can use is a lens of responsibility. The lens of responsibility. What does this mean? It means that if you are looking at the systems that you are designing, you should limit the responsibility of any given actor in the system. I'm going to say this again. As you are designing systems in your life, whether that system is, let's say you're a manager, and you're designing a system for one-on-ones. The system in this case, or the actor in the system in this case, is the process of the one-on-one. Right? This is a process that you have that you instate in order to do something with your reports. Deciding what that something is, what is it that this particular actor, this system or process of doing one-on-ones, what is it responsible for? Right? Think about this for a second. Why do we do one-on-ones? Well, the one-on-one might be responsible for surfacing issues, maybe interpersonal issues between team members, right? That might go on the responsibility list. A one-on-one might be that might be the place where you share feedback. It might be a place where you strengthen your personal connection with your reports. Maybe you share stories with each other about what you did over the weekend. That can be part of the responsibility of a one-on-one. But here's where this lens becomes productive. What is not on the responsibility list? How do you limit the responsibility of a one-on-one? Maybe one of your limitations for your one-on-ones is that you're not going to do software design review. You're not going to review code or talk about a specific mechanism in code in those one-on-ones. And you may have good reasons for doing this, or maybe this is not the specific thing you want to do. I'm not saying in this episode that you should do that in your one-on-ones. That's not what this is about. But instead, if you want to instate that one-on-ones are reserved for the relational aspects or for career development rather than for fixing a tactical problem in code, then you're creating some kind of boundary for your system. Hopefully, your ears perked up if you've ever done any kind of domain-driven design. Domain-driven design is all about defining responsibilities inside of a system, and especially about limiting responsibility in a system. Here's what happens if you don't limit responsibility. The purpose for a given actor in a system, in this case, the one-on-one meetings, but you could also think about this in terms of services in a microservice architecture, or you can think about this as your responsibilities in any given relationship. The purpose of having responsibilities for a given actor is to clarify what that actor should focus on. How do you determine whether that particular system is succeeding? If you don't have clear responsibilities outlined for a given actor in a system, then it is not clear whether that actor is succeeding. And so, if you're looking at the system and trying to improve it, there's no particular way to do that. By setting up responsibilities, you are providing focus. That's it. Now, if you think about what that means, it means that for a given system, you should consider all of the responsibilities of the system as a whole, and then determine where do those various responsibilities exist within the system. Are the actors that need to be here actually here, or should we consider whether a new actor should be added to the system? Should we have a new process, right? Maybe you have been doing that kind of design review in the one-on-ones and you don't want to do that anymore, but there's no actor that makes sense to move that responsibility to. Well, it might be time to institute a new part of the process, right? A new actor in the system might be a process for design review. Again, this is very similar to what you might do in domain-driven design. You recognize that there are a number of responsibilities emerging that don't necessarily fit in the services that you currently have laid out. Maybe it's time to consider adding a new service. And that is kind of the point of that design architecture. And it works well for system design as well, beyond just domain-driven design in software. And not to spoil it, but I can give you a hint here. Your company is a system. The people who work at your company have jobs. They have roles. Those roles have responsibilities. This limitation of responsibility inside of the system of the company is necessary. For those of you who are frustrated by your coworkers saying something like, "That's not part of my job description," you may be relieved to understand that job descriptions are needed. And if there is a problem with a lack of responsibility being shared, if your team is not succeeding together and instead you see somebody kind of washing their hands of the problem, then maybe it's time to review where those responsibilities should be. Allowing responsibilities to just be handed off without any kind of intentional design of those responsibilities is a recipe for disaster. It certainly is not sustainable. And so for most of the people who are saying that's not part of my job, most of the time, they're probably not saying, "I don't care about this." Instead, they might be saying, "We need to figure out whose job that is. I shouldn't do it because I have other things that I'm supposed to be focusing on. And so if I'm supposed to be focusing on one thing, but then I'm doing something else, I'm not really doing my job very well, am I?" Focus on finding the right limit of responsibility. Now, that doesn't mean that we're always going to have a perfect answer. It doesn't mean that you should drop responsibilities on the floor just because they're not in your predefined list. That is not what we're advocating on this show. But you should not perpetuate designs that create more uncertainty about responsibilities. When you hear someone saying, that's not really my responsibility, or if you are working on a team in your service layer, you're feeling that the responsibility is not in that service, I'd encourage you, and this is more of a piece of advice in these situations where responsibilities are unclear, I would encourage you, instead of stopping at, that's not my responsibility, engage in the process of figuring out where that responsibility should go. Don't just drop something on the floor because you don't think you're supposed to do it. And don't just send people away from asking your team to implement something in your API just because your team probably shouldn't put that thing in the API. Help other people solve the problem of figuring out those responsibilities. Not everyone knows that responsibility limitation is actually a net positive. And so you have an opportunity to help them understand that and to design their own responsibilities better in the future. Thanks so much for listening to today's episode of Developer Tea. I hope you will engage in system design that limits the responsibility of each actor going forward. That is the takeaway of this episode. If you enjoyed this discussion, I'd encourage you to join the Developer Tea Discord community. Head over to developertea.com/Discord. That's developertea.com/Discord. Thanks so much for listening. And until next time, enjoy your tea.